You're listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast, the podcast for communications professionals in the corporate world who are committed to advancing their work and our field's reputation as critical business advisors that are not only invited to the decision-making table, but are required there. I'm your host, Tara McDonagh. Hello, and welcome to the Communications Business Advisor podcast. Today's episode, we tackle metrics. Again, I talked about the importance of qualitative metrics in episode 4, so if you haven't heard it yet, go back and have a listen. We really only touched on the surface in that episode, so today we're going to continue the metrics conversation along with a special guest. I have invited Natalie Papaj, Vice President of Communications at Wells Fargo, to join me today. Natalie, tell us a little bit about what you do for Wells Fargo. What are you responsible for?
Thanks, Tara. Excited to be here. Really am passionate about this topic because if you're not measuring, you don't know if you're successful. So a little bit about me. I've been in the field of communications for the last 15 to 20 years, primarily been in technology communications. I lead a group at Wells Fargo that is responsible for our technology, strategy, digital, and innovation, and really focused on 360-degree communications programs, both internal and external. There's a lot to unhash in our role from a metrics perspective that shows how we're moving the needle on our brand reputation around the innovation and forward-thinking progress of the bank.
Yeah, so I happen to know the size of you don't think tech when you think Wells Fargo, but I happen to know this from working with you that the size and scope is massive. So how many employees is it in the tech organization and the innovation and everything else, the digital organization?
So the technology organization is just around like 40,000, 50 to 60 combined, I would say, across two lines of businesses within the bank.
Wow.
So, yeah, you don't really think, when you think Wells Fargo, people probably don't think tech, but I mean, think of everything that you need to do to keep your money secure and provide that great user experience.
Oh, yes.
On the go.
Please keep my money secure. Yeah, when you think about it, I'm never going to a bank. I'm using my app, going to an ATM. I'm all of the tech stuff that we just take for granted. And so obviously, yeah, of course, Wells is a tech organization. Should have thought of that. So thanks for sharing that, Natalie. And your focus is on, internal, external, and all of that work, making sure that you're externally and internally driving your goals forward. So for those listeners, Natalie and I have known each other for a few years. She's been a client both on the corporate consulting side of my business, and she is a founding member of the Raise the Tide leader community. And one thing I learned about her, among many of her skills in communications, is her passion for a focus on metrics. So I asked our listeners to share some questions on metrics for us to tackle here today, and we're going to hit on a couple of them. So let's start there. Shall we? Are you ready for this, Natalie?
I'm ready. As I'll ever be.
Yeah, great. Our first question is from Derek Harmon, who said, "It's the thorn in all our sides, but execs asking the true value of earned media. PR is the long game and building up a reputation, but for those who want numbers, ... If the gold standard is seeing an all-encompassing view of unique views to publications you're mentioned in, the sentiment of those mentions, social shares and engagements of your earned media, traffic from your earned media, social shares to your site, and if that traffic convert to leads," that was a lot. "What tool can get us PR pros that accurate data story? And if there is no tool, how can PR pros demonstrate their value for execs who want to see the numbers?"
Great question. And I have a lot to unpack considering my early days of PR and metrics probably started in 2007, where I did a lot of this from a manual perspective. And I wouldn't completely rule that off the table because I do think it gives you a lot of good insights and you get really intimate with your coverage. I think from a tools perspective, there's a lot of different platforms out there that I'm sure you may be familiar with. I think there's Cision One. I think they absorbed Trend Kite a few years ago. Meltwater is one of them. Critical Mention, Signal AI, I've seen pop up on the radar. We personally use Cision. I think what I would say about all of the platforms out there, though, it's garbage in and garbage out, meaning that you've got to put in the investment and time up front to really hone in on that algorithm that's searching and scanning your coverage and searching your influencers and scoring your social media sentiment and engagement, et cetera, and really fine tune to what you're looking for, whether it's a specific topic. So we'll go in and we measure like behemoth, like how is Wells Fargo doing across tech share of voice, right? And where are we driving engagement? But then like where I really find value is like, okay, here's like certain topics that we really want to move the needle on for our innovation story. So let's drill down into like everyone's talking about AI today. Like how do we stack up against AI and really zone in onto specific thought leadership topics, or maybe it's a product announcement or a product launch that you're working on, but really maybe create a broad list within that database or a broad topic to see how you're scoring overall. But then like slice and dice for individual campaigns, because I think that's where I've been able to tell, what's working and what's not along the way as well.
I love that concept of making sure that you're using the parameters up front to figure out exactly what you're trying to measure, because the examples here that Derek shared of, social shares, views on a story, all of that, that's helpful, but it doesn't show us the connection to behavior change, leads, how often we're mentioned, brand visibility. Yep. So share of voice can tell us about, brand visibility in connection to what we're actually trying to progress with from a business perspective. And then I think I shared in episode 4 a bit of a story on the qualitative and how qualitative can lead to quantitative metrics that can allow you to get numbers around something like we were able to get recruitment, a candidate placed in this role because they saw the article, and that candidate is worth this much money. And she wouldn't have even seen our company had we not shared this article. And that can lead to then numbers of how much is that role worth? How much did we pay in advertising dollars to try to get that position moved forward? There's so many ways to measure. And I think a lot of times we stop as a comms field before we get to and what does it tell us? What is the purpose? What are we trying to show? So if we start from the end zone of what are we trying to show? What are we trying to understand? We can then find the ways in which to get it. And I think what you're talking about is that, and like you, my days of tracking metrics were manual back in my day too, which I won't even share the date, but we're talking about cutting stories from newspapers and copying them.
And Xeroxing.
Xeroxing, creating clip books, So love that question from Derek. Is there anything else you'd have to share on that before we move on to our next question?
I think two other thoughts just on this. I think starting from, as you said, like from your objectives as well, like what are your company goals and mapping your communications to those goals, because that gives you a clear indicator of what you were saying of like, what does the end zone look like? What are we trying to get to understand what it is what are the metrics that are going to help you move the needle? And, that's both to reach your comms goals, your lather back up to your company goals, and also see along the way, like how you need to tweak your communication strategy, whether it's, quarter by quarter, yearly. I like to do it on a quarterly basis to see how we performed last quarter. And maybe we need to dial up in a certain channel and dial down in another. Or maybe we blew it out of the water here and we want to replicate it on another campaign later on. So I think really starting, as you said, with that end zone really gives you insight on what to measure. Specific to his question around like the platform, I don't think you're going to find like one magic single source of truth. Like we are stitching our metrics together from multiple sources. And you know what? It also helps to validate too along the way. It's just like doing an algebra problem, just y equal x at the end. Is what I'm getting off of this platform the true reading that I'm getting off of my website analytics, and what are they saying? And then you're able to go deeper, I think, on certain analytics when you do slice it around and use, a platform versus Google Analytics and really meshing that full story together to, as you said, maybe it's driving conversion rates. So I'm able to actually show from the platform that we had so many engagements, and maybe it's a spike in coverage, right? I'm able to pull that. And then I'm able to go to like my Google Analytics team and say, hey, on this date, when we launched this campaign and we went out on social media, like, what does your website traffic show? Like, do you see a click and users going, changing behavior, doing what you said? Did you drive a conversion rate? Did you see an increase in activity on the mobile app? And really like stitch that together for a cohesive narrative around your metrics.
I could talk with you about this all day, Natalie. And you're preaching to the choir, as you know. We're like, we are a choir here when we talk about business goals. Start with your business goals first. And I do love the concept that no tool is going to get you everything, nor actually do I think it should. It's actually really good to get in there and get dirty with your numbers. And if you got in this field because you don't want to do math, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. You got to do math when you're in this field.
But the sexy part of it is analyzing it, right?
Yes!
Like we are that brain and that side of the house. So as much as like the numbers scare you, a lot of the numbers are just being pulled. And like, I think the beauty of it comes from how we analyze and interpret those numbers.
Thank you. That was awesome. Moving on to our next question. Deborah Bright said she'd love to hear what KPIs you feel are most important to track.
I'm going to take this question from like a full 360 comms approach, and kind of going back to what I said, part of my last response was around what are your company objectives, right? I always start there to understand what it is that we want to achieve to be successful at the end of the year. And so KPIs are always mapped to, from a comms perspective, mapped to what we want to achieve from the company perspective, whether that's attracting and retaining new talent, whether that is increasing usage on our digital platforms. Maybe it's driving benefits enrollment. Like maybe you have to switch carriers this year and you need to drive benefits enrollment. So I think it's understanding what it is that you need to achieve to be successful, to really understand what KPIs to track. If internal metrics are more important in your scope of work, in your business, then your metrics are going to look a little bit different from an external perspective. I think my number one favorite KPI overarching is probably like message uptick and retention. Mm-hmm. Did your audience, whether they're employees or they're consumers, analysts, whoever that audience is, did they not only receive the message, but did they understand the message that you were putting out? And that for me, I think is probably the top of my KPIs across the board, because if your message isn't being received and interpreted how you want it to be, then you need to go back to the drawing board on that.
Yeah, you're right, Natalie. That's actually true across whether you're internal or external, looking at it from a macro level. If you can share a message, but if people aren't getting it, then you need to adjust your messaging. Or it's a way to prove to your executives, you think you're talking about X, but no one thinks that that's not what they're hearing from you. And so it's a way to also coach and guide your executives in a different way using that data.
100%. If I had to stand on one leg at the end of the day and say that nothing else matters in our role, I would go back to like messaging being the foundational. We are here to communicate. That is our primary purpose, right? Mm-hmm. Everything else that we do is just the means of how we do it. So if you're not successful in delivering the message, we don't have a leg to stand on.
Then what are we doing here, right?
Right.
Then go get somebody to help you learn how to do it better.
Yep. I think that there's just so many things to unpack under KPIs, like in general, right? And outside of that one that I'd put to the very tippy top, there's just so much there that you could go into from a KPI perspective.
We could have an entire call dedicated to various ways to track KPIs. I would put up with your message resonance KPI, I would put behavior change connected to that, or action is another way of talking about it. When you can't come up with some way to measure something, this is a little hot tip that I like to do, create a contest If you create a contest where it's like, something fun and engaging inside your organization, you can get people to take action that then shows like, we want people to call this phone number as an action. That's how we'll measure whether or not they read the message or we want them to text it or whatever it is. You create a contest around it, and then you can measure how many people actually texted the number. Then we know how many people read it.
Gamification. Everyone loves it.
When I say gamification, it's funny because the executives look at me like I grew another head. When I say contest, they get it. Whereas I think in tech, that would be different for you. They get it and they would love it.
Yeah.
So those of you in tech use it. Those of you outside of tech, if you're talking with the head of, HR or marketing, maybe not marketing, they get gamification, but the CEO, the CFO, tell them you're going to create a contest and track results around it. People talk in this field about not having solid metrics to track. And it's like, yeah, we actually have a lot that we can do. But I think there's two big challenges. One is we're worried that they're not quote unquote bulletproof. When you're dealing with something like finance, where there's like hard numbers, people can be worried that whatever they're sharing, you can poke a hole in it. But there's art and science to this field. So I think we just need to get over it and use what we can. There's analysis in fields like finance too, but they're allowed to make analysis. So why aren't we? And I think the second big barrier that was actually brought up today by someone who follows me on LinkedIn, I hadn't really thought of before, is that he thinks some people are worried that the metrics will show them that they're not doing a good job. And I thought, and this was from a comms person, and I thought, it's like a confidence issue. And I could actually see that being true for some people. And that's a whole other way of tackling it.
But bring it.
Bring it.
I think go to school every day, right? You get grades daily. You get grades at the end of the quarter. Would you just rather be surprised at the end of the year that you failed? Or would you like the opportunity to retest and retry? I mean, the most successful people aren't afraid to fail, right? And I think metrics are a great point of, they're a safety net for not failing, essentially.
I love that view.
Look at them along the way, especially kudos to all you people doing benefits enrollment, because that's a daunting task and you don't have the choice to fail at the end. So if you're not looking at your metrics week over week and you're not tailoring your comm strategy under those subtopic KPIs, you could be in for a rude awakening at the end. And I know everyone that's done benefits enrollment does not want to be in that rude awakening stage. So yeah, just embrace it. Be kind of happy when it fails. Gives you another path to know that that's not the right channel market opportunity for the message that you're trying to get out. So learn from it and tailor your comm strategy before you get to the end of the year and you're not happy with where you are.
Fear of failure, future events that aren't real, FEAR. So don't let it, just derail you. I love that. To be proactive about it. And why do we have to fear metrics? Let's make them ours. Let's own them. Let's be proud to share them. Okay. The next question, Nicola Watson asked, how do people measure behavioral change? And now my guess is that this question from Nicola is focused more on the internal comm side. But let's hear your first, Natalie, and then I may have some more to add here. We hit on this a little bit already on behavior change.
It's really clearly defining what that behavior change means to your organization. So once you establish that, you can set up KPIs and methods to track that particular behavior change that you're trying to elicit. There's multiple, ways that you can achieve this. Perhaps it's surveys and questionnaires. Is there a change in how people receive the message? Did they understand your communication? There's social media and digital metrics like your likes, your comments, your engagements. They can indicate a change in behavior. Maybe before you were getting very negatives under your message, maybe they've shifted to positive. That's a change in people's behavior from an external side. Email open rates and click-through rates. Click-through rates, I think, are great. Did you convert people to do what you've asked them to do? Customer employee retention rate. Are people staying and returning to your company? Are they using your product, et cetera? Like, how is that uptick going? A lot of these metrics aren't necessarily metrics that you might own from a comms perspective, but you can stitch them together to what your communication KPIs and communication objectives are, right? And you can use them to support the individual tactics that you're pushing out from a comm standpoint.
Yeah. It's very easy, I think, when you're thinking about it from a specific standpoint. So if you're trying to increase attendance at town halls, let's say, and you go through an entirely different approach to how you do town halls and how you communicate town halls, and the timing of town halls and all of this stuff in order to make them more attractive for your employees, then you can measure how many people are coming, right? And then you can measure at the end of the town hall, what were the 3 key messages that you heard in our town hall? And do they match up with the 3 key messages that you were trying to get them to understand? And then are they taking the action of showing up for the next town hall? Are they increasing in numbers? So the behavior change could be attendance where they weren't attending before. It could be using a tool internally to try to get them to stop calling HR or a specific person for every question, but instead call the service center. Is your communication campaign working in getting them to call the service center instead of Joe and HR? That's measurable, right? So I think it's super easy when you can start thinking about the action that you're trying to get out of the campaign for the business partner that you're supporting. If it's an app, like in banking, you're trying to get them to maybe start using a new app. Are they using it? Are they using it? And is adoption rate increasing in the time frame in which you're doing your campaign that you can then, as you say, stitch together?
But I was saying some of these metrics aren't necessarily owned from a comms perspective, but you got to get to know your stakeholders across the business that can help you tie in the success to the tactics that you're working on. And I think the app example was probably a spot on example of something that my team has done. Is we launched an influencer campaign, right? And we were able to pull all sorts of data from that, whether that was web click-through rates and sentiment, et cetera. Like, what's the end goal? The end goal is to get people using the app and going to the experience. So we were able to go into the app analytics, and I'm probably it's not my data. So I don't know what you exactly term it, but I was able to work with the product team and pull that data to show, gosh, on these key launch dates with these X, Y, and Z influencers, we were able to move that needle. Like, we were seeing a spike in traffic to the app store. So, that also gave us insight into like what influencers really help spike that, what channels really help spike that from a paid media perspective, et cetera. So yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's going across the board with whether that's your HR stakeholders, your product stakeholders within your organization to understand what data that they have, because they're standing it up for their programs too. And you can then lean on their data to help support key moments in time across your campaign, which I think is really important to show that holistic picture back to those company objectives.
Yeah, I can see that being a powerful metric to share with your executives.
Yeah. I would also say don't overthink behavior too, right? I think some people think, yes, like behavior is how someone acts, but how they think and do. So I think those surveys that we talked about and message resonance is just as important too, because you are changing perceptions, which then influences behavior.
First comes the perception change, and then comes the behavior. Okay, thanks. Okay, our next question came from Liz Eckert. Before she shared her question, she had some context to share. And here's what she said. I lead a communications team at a nonprofit, and I do have a small but mighty team. One thing we struggle with is balancing the time it takes to pull and track and analyze metrics, especially when there are so many that we can pull, and putting it into a report that makes sense to stakeholders. It's really time consuming and sometimes takes away from the time we need to do the work. Don't get me wrong, we do measure some things. I would just love to hear from other leaders how they balance measurement and endless amount of data available with the need to get the work done. All right. That's a cool question. What do you have to share, Natalie? And before you do share, I will state that I happen to know that Natalie has not always been part of a large company with tons of resources. So please share a bit about how you got it done in a smaller team also.
Sure. It doesn't matter. We're even larger teams as well. I think metrics is something from a time bandwidth perspective that everyone struggles with. I think also it's kind of like the cobbler's son never has new shoes.
Yeah.
PR people never PR their own work. But I think you got to start looking at it wider than just PRing your work. I think obviously that's always great and you should be doing that, but look at metrics beyond that and look at the value that it brings to see the effectiveness of how your campaign is running as you're going along to make tweaks in real time. Look at metrics to see how you are moving on your company objectives, because that's what we're all here for at the end of the day. And then let's also look at metrics to get you budget.
Yeah.
So I think giving a much wider scope to how we should be using metrics, I think also gives you more rationale to how important you should make your metrics in your day-to-day. I would say, I think starting, just don't ever put out another comms campaign without measurable objectives. So she said they're not doing that. They do value their metrics, but I do see a lot of comms case studies go across that are measuring outputs. So let's all just raise our hand and say that we're not going to do another campaign without measurable objectives. So I think always finding a place to start is the best way to go about it from a baseline perspective for anyone just wondering where to begin on metrics, because there are so many that can overwhelm you. So starting your campaign with measurable objectives will give you what it is you want to measure so that you're not then looking at this ocean of metrics that you could pull. You want to then just hone in on what it is that matters to your specific campaign versus trying to boil the ocean here. I think also starting early in that process too, templatize it. Yep. Give yourself in the beginning, spend more time up front at the beginning of the year, or take a pause right now and really set your metrics foundation, because what that's going to help is, I hear what you're saying, when you get to the end of a campaign and you're we're just trying to execute, how do we stop and pull? If you've templatized your metrics from, say, the beginning of the year, or you just, start now and start doing it, you're going to be able to put this on clockwork and automate it more for yourself. So when you're in the campaign, you're not taking a ton of time out from that particular project to stop and pull the metrics, or you get to the end and I know you just want to put it back on the shelf and move on to the next thing. But if you have the metrics template set up from the beginning, you can just start to run those and it becomes more like clockwork and less bandwidth on your team to get those results across, because you're going to be doing it day in and day out. I think also from a leader perspective, the one thing you can do is get your team the space to get the metrics done. Sales teams have the space, right?
Yeah.
They have the space to go in and pull their results, and they've got an expectation at the end of the quarter from the board that those results and those numbers are going to go up. Your team deserves the same amount of space to be able to produce those results. So one thing we've been practicing on our team is let's do more with less, right? And so if that means giving up, and I know not everyone has the luxury doing this, but just think, what if you focus really hard on quality over quantity, which metrics are a huge part of showing that quality? If you gave up one project or one announcement to really focus more on end to end of the full campaign, including that metrics component, the value that it could bring to your future campaigns and to your next project, I think is really, really impactful.
I would like to cheer you for saying, let's use those metrics to get you budget, because this is something that is not done often enough and is such an opportunity. On the flip side of what I shared earlier of people being worried about that the metrics won't prove the data the way that they hope, what if the data shows just how indispensable you and your team are and how critical you are to this company, which is what most of us believe, at least aspire to. And so if we can prove that, then you can start putting numbers behind why your team deserves more investment. So I'm going to like cheer you on for that, because that is such a critical point to metrics, and also your point of giving the team time. Sales teams, yeah, I'd love to see a sales team that says like, we think we did a good job, without having to show how many sales they closed, what those dollars were worth. I think once we start looking ourselves as true business partners and a business area, then we're like, we fall in love with the metrics. And it's this like loving challenge for us to make them better and better. And on that note, I hear what she's saying in terms of, I've got a small and mighty team, like, oh my God, overwhelmed much? I get it. But if you've got like, let's say 2 to 3 core metrics that you're really trying to prove, let's say one of them is, the behavior change, and another one is are they getting what we're saying, message resonance? And let's say there's a third, then you can make that your macro metric. And then with every campaign, do micro specific metrics that show you how to make that happen. How do you prove that any of one or two or all three of those things happened in your campaign? And I also want to be clear, when I say contests are a great way to show behavior change or behavior adoption or action, do them, but don't do them for every freaking campaign, because you'll get exhausted, and so will every other person that you're trying to have a contest for. Do it for the big rocks, the big stuff that moves, that's going to like be imperative for your organizational success. Try it out though. This is the part where innovation can be fun, right? Don't innovate for innovation's sake. Innovate because it can actually start proving something to you, to your team, to your company.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say start small. Don't boil the ocean, because there is like so much here that you could keep unpacking, but really honing in on what those few things are that you're trying to achieve is the best place to start, and also can provide the most meaning and value to a smaller team. And doubling back on what I said around templatizing it.
Yep.
Like, for example, create your scorecard, create your playbook at the beginning of the year. I use it year over year, or ours just gets kind of refreshed. And what it is like, this is how we get an A. This is how we get a B. This is how we, and honestly, like we do this with our media strategy of hate impressions. Do I give them to my senior execs? Hell yeah, I give them to my senior execs. And where I think I rely on them from a media strategy is it helps us tier our media. It's one indicator of how we want to tier our media. It gives them an idea too of like why we're saying no to Joe Schmo at the blogger publication that has 25 views versus yes to a tier A publication that has 25 million views. Because sometimes they that rationale is not there. And that's what we're here to do, is counsel on why one opportunity is more worth your time than another. But using, going beyond impressions in earned media is maybe a tier C publication that only has 15,000 views is just as important to you as being on the front of the Wall Street Journal, not for certain strategies. If you are looking to hire and retain top tech talent, for example, where's that source? Where's that outlet that you want to go to constantly be in front of top tech talent, and then creating your scorecard for your media off of that specific goal, and like giving a number to, okay, this publication is a 5, this publication is a 10, and this publication is a 15. And like, what's our final score to get us that A in this assignment, right? So templatizing that from the very beginning of your year, that's just a media example of what we do. We go through and we score like our top targets from a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 perspective. But it doesn't mean all my tier 3 publications have a less number than my tier 1, because for certain examples, they might weigh heavier.
Yeah. I think setting the tone with the executives that you're working with before you even set out on that campaign is important. And we'll talk about this in future episodes, but we're going to pause for just a second, and I will be right back with Natalie Papaj. The Communications Business Advisor podcast is brought to you by Raise the Tide, the program for women communications leaders and emerging leaders working in the corporate environment. Raise the Tide is part community, part coaching, part professional development, and part mentorship. The program advances women in their careers and activates these trailblazers to advance our vision of a corporate world that not only invites communications leaders to act as critical advisors, but expects them to. A rising tide raises all ships, but we're not the ships. Together, we're the force of the tide, raising the ships for our entire industry. For more information, visit www.raisethetide.net. Natalie, I think it's time we ask you the question that is on everyone's mind. What do you do for measurement? Share us a little bit more about what you do, what you track, and why.
I am a strong advocate for IPESO, internal, paid, earned, shared, owned. Some people use social owned. Gina Dietrich's Spin Sucks is a great reference for anyone that wants to read more on that. But one of the reasons that I love it is the metrics that you can extract from it. It tells a really powerful story. I think also just in terms of tell them what you told them, tell them what you tell them a third time. I know I fumbled that, but basically, in order for people to retain your message and drive behavior, I think there's at least three times they need to see your message, and getting it in front of them in all these different channels, I think helps with that message resonance and brand narrative and uptick. So that being said, we deploy IPESO on all of our communication programs for the technology team at Wells. Doesn't mean that we use every single channel every single time. We're just thinking about every campaign in 360 degrees, and we're trying to sweat our assets across the multitude of channels. So what are we measuring on the back end? Start with internal. We're measuring, there are people showing up to our town hall. Are we driving message resonance? Are they understanding what we said? What were their top 3 takeaways? How were they? Are we driving behavior? Are we educating our employees on what's in our pipeline and big company initiatives and, tech rollouts for the enterprise? And do they understand what to do? Are they taking action? Is our communication channels working? I think one thing a lot of companies are struggling with now is length, right? Like people are just so getting hit on all angles. Like, how do you make more concise messaging? Is that going to help? We do a lot of the Axios, what is that? Smart brevity, shortening. Everyone wants it done in 140 characters. So I think in terms of just all of that coupled together, that's what we're looking at from an internal standpoint. Like how effectively is our message being communicated? Is it driving behavior? And what are all those channels that can help tell that story? And how can we tweak it to improve all of those micro KPIs, as you said earlier? Yeah. From a paid media perspective, that's a little bit more cut and dry. It's kind of nice. You know what you're going to get in front of hand. You're signing a agreement up front that you're going to hit so many impressions. You're going to your ballpark, or where you will land no matter what, because that campaign is going to keep on running. But also then you've got click-through rate that is coming out of that. You've got page views. How long did they spend on the time? Did they click over to your website? Where did they go from your website? Once they clicked over there, where did they go from that? We also take a lot of our paid media too, and then we push it through the other channels. Do we bring it to employees? Is it something that they want to see? We can measure that. Is it our advocacy program to help further amplify this on social? So then you're getting into, all the social sentiment and metrics, the likes, the engagement, etc. Earned media, I talked a little bit about earlier, but we really do that scorecard of, if we're looking at it like a baseball game, what gets us a single, what gets us a double, what gets us a triple, and what's a grand slam. And at the end of the day, how many runs do we need to score to win the game? We're looking at our media titles across the board in terms of that scoring mechanism. I think also when we look through our coverage and we analyze it, we're looking for, okay, were we quoted? Did the right message hit? Was there a picture? Were we in the headline? We're analyzing all of that, which that's what I used to spend my days doing manually. It's not bad. You get really intimate with your coverage. So if we do a lot of executive presence on LinkedIn. So did they grow their following? Was there Was that growth like key people you're trying to influence? Was it, a good network, like the quality of that following, the sentiment, the likes, the shares, the reach, etc. Then we're also looking at it from like tailoring perspective, like what I said earlier on internal, like is video resonating more? Is this message better on Instagram versus LinkedIn or what have you? So there's tons to extract there, click-through rate, website data, etc. And then you've got your owned channel, which I do a lot with. So like from a brand journalism perspective, like I consider this like your company blog would be a good example of an owned channel. I kind of like, if you're looking at integrated marketing campaigns, like this has been vital for us. And I've seen like a huge uptick of where we need to be telling our story. And one reason for this is because it completes that full circle, like back to your thought leadership on your homepage. Like, where are you going to drive people to? If you haven't created something, the blog is a great place to do it. But you're able, again, to pull all those website analytics. How long are they spending on your page? What type of content were they reading? Like, what drove the most readership? So you can then like fine-tune your content strategy going forward. Like if nobody's reading a certain topic, understand why, and then understand what they are reading and where you need to maybe double down.
I'd also share one thing we haven't talked about in terms of metrics that I know many of us have done at prior points in our career. I'm sure you've done them too, are the concept of like the audit, right? Know where you're starting from so that you know where you can get to. So I look at audits in a specific way. I've got a specific methodology for them, and it's really focused on, and you're going to have things like focus groups and surveys and interviews and all of that, right? To figure out, is your messaging the problem or is it the tool or technology? You can do those for internal or external. You can do it to prove that your company should stay away from taking a specific path, which I'll share. Maybe I'll share a LinkedIn story about that. But I'd also say that those are really great measurement tools that there's not a lot of methodology behind in terms of people using them for a specific goal to try to then figure out where you are in order to understand how you're moving things. And those should be done every few years, in my opinion, especially or in times of change where the company might be shifting its perspective or acquiring a new company, things like that actually change the structure and the composition of the company. That was awesome, Natalie. Thank you. I have another question here, though. One thing that I know many of our peers struggle with is implementing a measurement mindset on their teams. So getting the team to see that this is beneficial for them, not just something that's required in order to share with executives. So I encourage measurement conversations every quarter focused on what we'll do differently, even if the assessment is there that it was a home run. It creates a culture of discussion around continuous improvement, and it makes metrics a safe place rather than a scary place. And on the measurement reporting side, I recommend that every single slide in a presentation to an executive answers the question, what does this slide tell us? What's the key takeaway for the reader? So what do you do to foster this measurement mindset on your team, Natalie?
I kind of go back to what I originally said around it's not just about PR. There's so many purposes to metrics, whether that's at the end of the year for an individual contributor on your team to like stand up how they were successful this year. That's their mine of data to show how they move the needle against those company objectives. It can be to influence budget, because who doesn't love to get more money and funding for their program? So how to make a business case to expand into maybe it's paid media or expand into paid social or get more money for some of your programs for an event, et cetera. Having those metrics conversations on a quarterly basis and putting those business case forward. And then I think just also that fine-tuning your communication strategy and your content strategy along the way, like what's working and what's not. We all don't want to go to school and at the end of the semester come home with a C or a D. We want that A. So knowing where you sit along the way sets you up for success in the long run, so you can change things and strive for that A.
I agree with that. I think so much of this is about leadership and setting the tone with them, that if something isn't going well, it's not about placing blame. It's about adjusting your campaign or whatever it is you're working on to make it more successful. And so if you're having those conversations regularly, and that's the normal course of behavior in your team and the normal discussions, then people aren't going to be afraid of metrics
I think
so
it's an
much.
expectation too across the board. It's not a witch hunt by any means, but like I said, the sales team produces quarterly metrics. If your communications team isn't responsible for doing so, you should probably advocate that to your C-suite, because your metrics are just as important as anyone else's that are coming in for that quarterly review and should be done on that cadence.
You just hit on something that I wasn't planning on hitting on, but is so important here, because so many communicators will be like, well, I share it, but I don't know if they see it. I don't know if anybody pays attention. I don't know if what the response is. I say, don't stop until you get a response. So, and also if your sales team is presenting its metrics, why do you think you're not important enough to share yours? So, go get in that meeting, get in that room, share yours. And ask for thoughts. Put yourself out there. Does this make sense to people? Do you have any questions? Is there anything that doesn't seem, that you'd like to know more of? We got to have the mindset that we're the business area leaders that we are, right? That we're this critical business department. And would the sales team say okay, cool, you don't need to see my numbers? And I don't really expect any, response back. And I think that goes to the thing that was mentioned on my LinkedIn page, where it was, I think we're worried that they won't be strong enough. And I actually think that if you asked some peers about your own metrics, maybe that's a great place to start. Are you measuring the right thing? So listen today. And the beauty of this is it's a wealth of knowledge. And it's recorded, so you can go back and listen to it again and hear us talk about metrics as much as you want. Seek advice, seek counsel, but, push yourself and your team to be accountable to those scorecards that you set. Is there anything else you'd like to share or cover for our listeners today, Natalie?
I think we got most of it.
Okay, I agree. Thank you for joining us, Natalie, on the Communications Business Advisor podcast. We're talking all things measurement. I know our listeners very much appreciated it. We're going to have a link to Natalie's profile on LinkedIn, where she shares more about IPESO and measurement and other topics on a regular basis. So please feel free to follow her on LinkedIn. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time on the Communications Business Advisor. Until next time. If you're interested in working with me to advance your work and your team's reputation as critical business advisors, never order takers, check out TaraMcDonagh.com. Thanks for listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a rating or a review. It helps people find us, and we can't ignite a movement without sharing the message. See you next time, where we'll continue to do the work to elevate our field's reputation and elevate the careers of the people in it.